To what do you credit the fact that the Bletchley secret never was exposed until after the war, considering the number of people that were at Bletchley and the fact that you were billeted with the local population?
Yes, indeed. That is an important point. It isn't only the employees of the staff at Bletchley who were part of not giving the secret away. It was also the local residents. But I'm absolutely convinced that after 4 years of having linguists and mathematicians billeted on them, that there won't have been a large number of civilians in the Bletchley area who really hadn't got a good idea of what had been going on. But the point was, the whole attitude of people in those days to the need for secrecy was quite foreign to what exists today. In peacetime, what exists today. If you happen to hear something that wasn't part of your job, you didn't go and tell some local newspaper you discovered something. You didn't say anything about it to anybody. And of course the staff themselves knew more. And they were formally warned. There was a process when the place was being wound up. Everybody who had worked there was told that they must keep this secret indefinitely until there'd been the government changed it. And that's just what people did, their bailiwicks.
So, what is Bletchley Park today?
Bletchley Park today is a very mixed place. It consists of some tumble-down wooden huts in which some of the most important early days of the high-grade work was done. Some of them are covered in tarpaulins so they won't deteriorate further. And that is because lack of money. The British government has never provided any money to preserve anything at that site. These days, money has been promised if suitable plans are drawn up to deal with all these problems. But at the moment you've got tumble-down huts, some brick buildings which are reasonably habitable and are used one way and another, partly by the Bletchley Park Trust, whose function it is to preserve this site and to develop it as far as they possibly can. The other bits of the site have been sold off to other people. Quite different sorts of light industry are engaged in odd things there. It's a very mixed place. On the other hand, if you go there, there are well-conducted tours by voluntary people, by volunteers, who take you around to the interesting bits, missing out the stuff which has popped up, which has nothing to do with the wartime Bletchley Park.
If you go near the place, it's well worth the tour.
Did the Germans have the equivalent of a Bletchley?
They did. The thing was they had more than one. This is rather like the American setup. And I think, this is just me, I think that some of the non-cooperation between American government organizations, between each other, is they learnt or inherited from Germans, because this was one of their main weaknesses during the war. People who should have been collaborating with each other just didn't. And they had a SIGINT organisation with quite a lot of successful work, the individual bits of it, but they never really mounted a national effort. They might have gone further. They never broke the equivalent British or American high-grade ciphers. They probably didn't even attempt, because they thought that modern machine ciphers, such as their own, were unbreakable, and so they didn't even try. Yes,
You had a comment about Dieppe.
Oh, do I?
About the potential code change to the pilot, because they were listening.
Well, yes. Yeah. One of the things about the Dieppe raid, which as probably in Canada know better than people in England, was a raid carried out during the war against a difficult target. And one of the issues has been, had the Germans had any warning about it? Well, They undoubtedly were prepared, but their defences were in place, and the people running these defences rapidly began to do what they'd been doing. But an important point to remember is that's what Germans on the European coast were doing most of the war, being ready for raids against them. No wonder that the place was defended properly and that people were alert. But whether there was a link has been an issue. I haven't really done any research into this, but what I have found suggests to me there wasn't a deliberate leak by anybody on the Allied side. On the other hand, and I don't think it's been taken much account of, there is the German Signals Intelligence Organization, there were several, which I think did detect preparations for the Dieppe raid and were added to their degree of readiness. I mean, I can't imagine how they wouldn't have done, because on the Allied side, radio security was not as well developed. At least it wasn't as disciplined as it was on the German side. I think there was a lack of discipline in all the Allied forces. There were some serious weaknesses too. For example, the Royal Navy went on using an operational cipher which GC and CS knew and had told them was insecure, was breakable. They went on using it for years. They just wouldn't believe. The elderly admirals in charge just wouldn't accept the modern evidence. They did in the end, but terrible losses have been suffered before that. That is the worst example, I think, of Allied insecurity. It wasn't all as bad as that.
Today, if we were to consider a war breaking out now between nations, an enciphering device, or whatever one calls that, could it be truly unbreakable, at least if it were changed hourly or every 24 hours?
This is always an arguable point. It all depends on the scale, so to speak, and the speed of things. I don't believe, please, I'm no kind of expert on this, I'm just repeating what I've heard. What I gather is it's just a question of scale of effort. Mm-hmm. Nothing is theoretically unbreakable, but in practice an awful lot is these days. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you've told us how you were recruited, and my understanding is that your wife, John's mother, was also working at Bletchley Park.
Yes.
How was she recruited?
She finished school in about 1937 and went for a holiday in Italy with her uncle.
She's 1930 she went.
What did I say?
37.
Yes, thank you very much. Anyway, she went on this holiday in Italy before the war, and it so happened that her uncle's best friend was the British consul in Leghorn, which is where they lived. And this consul had recently lost his secretary. And it was suggested that Joan, my wife, might like to become the consul's secretary. Well, she'd left school, she needed a job sometimes, so she stayed in Leghorn and learnt Italian. And eventually her uncle was persona non grata to the Italians, because he was he was Lloyd's agent in Leghorn. His job was to report ship movements. The Italians were at war in Abyssinia and they didn't want anybody reporting ship movements, so they chucked him out. And his family had, of course, had to leave too, and my eventual wife came back to London, got a job there for a bit. Her uncle had got back before and had been recruited, or perhaps re-recruited, I'm not quite sure, by the Secret Intelligence Service, and had been placed in the Italian naval section of GC&CS. And they were short of linguists. He thought of his niece, So she joined the office about 2 years before the war as a linguist code breaker. And she was therefore there right from the beginning of the war. The Italian naval section, the one she worked in, was in the main building, whereas most of us were in these wooden huts. But the wooden hut just outside the mansion house, where my section was, actually if you looked out of the window of her office, you could see through the window of mine. We didn't know that.
There's a pic, we've got a little of these frame things going there, and there's a picture on there of her sitting there, and you can see the hut.
Yes, this uncle of hers was a keen photographer, but no photographs were allowed to be taken on Bletchley Park. But there exists a number of photographs of my wife and other scene and snow scenes and so forth, which are undoubtedly his work.
And the rest is history.
How long did you stay? How long did you stay at Bletchley Park?
To the end of the war.
Not beyond.
Well, we all left Bletchley Park at the end of the war. We moved back to an office, not an original place in Westminster, but on the edge, western edge of London. The whole outfit moved there, remained there for a few years, and then eventually moved out to Cheltenham, where it now is.
And Dad moved along with it.
Any other questions?
So when's food?
The food's on the table, and obviously you can carry on with questions and so on. What we're going to, there was an occasion last month, a very famous occasion at Bletchley Park, where the stone was unveiled. And this was the stone that Winston Churchill had made a speech on, and largely due to Dad's insistence that they've put a stone back. I don't know whether it was the next stone.
Probably not.
And they had a little ceremony, and Dad actually had Dad unveil the stone. And my sister gave a little talk ahead of this, and she's on this film. So we'll run that, but collect food and if you're interested, you can listen to this.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And help yourself to drink some
Replenish
away.
your glasses.